The prayer that I finished with, it said, love is protest and protest is love. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a bit of a sports fan. And when I think of protest recently, I can't help but think of Colin Kaepernick and his kneeling and the controversy that caused, and how somehow it became, he was protesting anti-racism, or he protesting racism, and it became that he was protesting the American flag. Interesting how that morphed into that. And it's really interesting now, if any of you are English soccer fans, the English Premier League, before every game, each player kneels at the instruction of the association before the game to protest racism. They do that before every game. Whereas in this country, that was seen as a protest against the flag. In England, of all places, it's seen as a statement of justice, a statement of liberation. But there was another sporting event, and I think we've all seen the photographs of Colin Kaepernick. And can you put up the first slide, please? And this was something from one of my Can you put it up again? That was a little quick. Now, some of you who are older may remember this image from Mexico Olympic Games, 1968. And for those too young, this was the Olympic ceremony for the 200-meter sprint. And the two African-American competitors, John Carlos and Tommy Smith. Tommy Smith won the gold. And they're doing the Black Power salute. And that was a huge controversy. They got expelled from the Olympic Village. They got sent back to the US. And they were ostracized by the Olympic Association. But by 1984, when the Olympic Games was in Los Angeles, they were welcome back. Racism had moved on a bit. But I want to talk about Peter Norman, the Australian, the silver medalist there, who's just standing there, the white guy. And this is not a white savior story. It's not about, oh, look at the white man helping him. But at the time, they thought he was protesting by not doing anything. He was part of this. And beforehand, when they were talking, he saw what John and Tommy were doing. They realized only one of them had brought a pair of gloves. And it was the Australian that said, well, why don't you each wear one? That's why one's holding up his right arm and one's holding up his left arm. But I think there's something beautiful about that picture, the left and the right, the juxtaposition of it. But they were protesting racism in this country. They were also protesting poverty. They're actually barefoot. And it's interesting that that's the most iconic photograph and you can't see their feet. And they were wearing bare feet to protest poverty. And all three of them were wearing Olympic Human Rights Committee badges, all three of them. And the reason I'm bringing this up now, because today I'm talking about how justice is love and love is justice. Here's what John Carlos, the bronze medalist, said, who was the main organizer of this. He said, I expected to see fear in Norman's eyes. Peter Norman, the Australian. I expected to see fear in Norman's eyes, but instead we saw love. Norman said, I will stand with you. Now, Peter Norman, when he got back to Australia, was completely ostracized for his protests. Even in 2000, when the Olympic Games were in Melbourne, he was not invited by the Australian committee. But the American Olympic Committee invited him. But Peter Norman grew up in Australia, which had a racist system as well. Some of you may be familiar with that. It had almost an apartheid system for the local Aboriginals, so he knew what racism was like, and he was a devoutly religious man. And he was pressured to condemn the Americans, which he never did. And he ended up not being able to work. He developed depression and alcoholism. He had a really tough life, but he never once thought about giving up. And he wasn't public about this. John and Tommy knew what he did. And when Peter Norman died in 2006, could you go to the next slide? They were pallbearers at his funeral. They so appreciated what he did. That's them at the front carrying his coffin in 2006 when he died. This is what Peter Norman said. You can take the slides down now. He said, Peter Norman said, "I couldn't see why a black man couldn't drink the same water from a water fountain, take the same bus, or go to the same school as a white man. There was a social injustice that I couldn't do anything from where I was in Australia, but I certainly hated it. It has been said that sharing my silver medal with that incident on the victory dais detracted from my performance. On the contrary, I have to confess, I was rather proud of it." And I think that's such an important element, because last week when I was talking about how we wanted to partner with other groups, how our mere presence, how we showed up, could make a difference, especially to the Latino community that we work with through Faith in Action. But it's also how we show up. Can we show up in love? We may show up with a fear or a discomfort, but that's not for us to share with them. It's for us to show up with love and courage and strength. So I'm going to ask you to do an exercise now, and I know it's going to be uncomfortable. This is good practice. Turn to the person next to you and tell them, "I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it." I love you, and there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I expect you to do that at the next protest, or when we're out there supporting Faith in Action or some rally. I want you to show up with love, go up to a stranger and say, "I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it." Good practice. You did really well. Passing grade. But there's also, could you put up the third slide? Now, some of you may be familiar with this slide. Is down at San Jose State University. And both of the athletes were former students at San Jose State University. But you notice how Peter Norman's missing. And here's what the artist said about it. He said, the artist was Rigo23. He said, "This invites the spectators to imagine themselves alongside the two icons and to follow their example in pledging to take responsibility and action towards eradicating anti-black racism and bias." And I'm sure people stand in that and get the photograph taken, not thinking about it. And at first when I saw that, I said, "It's a shame that Peter Norman's not there." But then I think, no, it's good that he's not there. Because I think one of the problems when many of us who identify as white get involved in justice, we center ourselves. And I think it's so important, if we do it in love, then we center those in need, those in comfort, those being oppressed. So I think it's appropriate. So if you're down in San Jose, go and visit that statue and think about that. And then think about of course, Peter Norman not being there, but also think about John and John Smith and Tommy. It's a beautiful statue if you've not seen it. I saw it recently. And by the way, last Saturday, it was vandalized. A week past on Saturday. I was planning to do this sermon last Sunday. We ran out of time, but the Saturday before it was vandalized and it's been repaired. So that racism still goes on. The need for that work, the need for partnering, the need for being present, the need for witnessing in love is still needed. You know, actions like Peter Norman's may be discredited, they may be misunderstood, and they may be condemned. Yet that is why we need to do it, and that's why we need to do it in love. And showing up in love, I remind us, is not to center ourselves. So that's why Peter Norman is not there. Is to center those in need. And that's what we can do when we show up in love, not expecting the glory, but willing to take the risks.